there, and welcome back to Modern World History. In the last video, we started to talk about the Industrial Revolution, and for the first time, we start to see where we're able to use machines and different types of resources and things like this in order to mass produce, and I mean like really mass produce, the kinds of consumable goods that people need on a day-to-day basis. It made clothes, for example, extremely cheap and affordable to most people. And it also led to urbanization, which we're going to look a little bit more at right now. And so what we're going to talk about in this video is some of the social changes that would occur initially with the Industrial Revolution, and then also kind of focus on how the Industrial Revolution would impact the world later to come. So first of all, industrialization brought about big change. Now this is kind of like a, no kidding, Fowler, because the reality here is when you look at this word revolution, remember, a revolution is a sudden, drastic change in something. And so, of course, the Industrial Revolution brought about a big change. And the change here is going to change the way we manufacture goods, but it's also going to have social changes, such as the growth of cities. They're going to grow out of just about nowhere. And so this right here, we call this urbanization. I finished up last video saying this here is a word you need to know. But what you're going to see also is the population shift from rural to urban. And this right here is going to be a form of interregional migration. All right. So I totally misspelled that. Migration. So what's happening is that people are going to move from the rural countryside into these new urban cities and urban communities as they build up. And the reason is simple. They are looking for work. All right. And the work that's being provided in these cities, all right, they're going to offer higher wages than what some of these poor farmers were initially getting. They're also going to enable more people to work. So even children are able to work in this. Even women are able to work in these factories. Now, they might not, their labor wouldn't have been worth the same as a man's labor, but they would have also had, it would have freed up the family to make more money by putting their wives and their kids. Now, the conditions here were terrible. I'm not condoning this. I'm just saying this is what people were kind of thinking. They worked really, really long hours, and the conditions were terrible, and the treatment of these women and kids was terrible as well. This comes right out of your textbook. It is a quick quote. You went down, I'm going to start right here at the top. You went down one step even from the foul area into the cellar in which a family of human beings lived. It was very dark inside. The window panes, many of them were broken and stuffed with rags. The smell was so fetid as almost to knock the two men down. They began to penetrate the thick darkness of the place, and to see 3 or 4 little children rolling on the damp, nay, wet brick floor, through which the stagnant, filthy moisture of the street oozed up. Now, that doesn't sound like the definition of a place I'd like to stay, but people went there looking for opportunities to work in these factories and make more money and live better lives. So, the child labor conditions were horrible. Kids as young as 5 or 6 would have been employed. My child is 7 years old. I couldn't imagine having my 7-year-old work in some of these conditions, and I also don't know how she would take to that, because getting her to brush her teeth in the morning is more than enough hassle for me. But if you look over here, again, this chart is in the textbook, but if you look at this day of the life of a child laborer, it kind of breaks down like a synopsis of what a child's day might look like in these mines. 5 a.m., they get up and they start their workday. 12 noon, all right, children were given a 40-minute break for lunch. That's the only break they would have all day. That's crazy stuff right there. Then at 3 p.m., the children would become drowsy because, come on, 5 o'clock in the morning, that's crazy. And they would have these adult overseers who would whip the kids and keep them awake. At 6 p.m., there was no break allowed for an evening meal, so children would eat on the run. And then 9 p.m., William Cooper, this particular kid, based on his experience, his day ended and he had worked a 16-hour shift. and at 11 p.m. his sister worked another 2 hours and would get off even later. And then they go to bed and repeat the process again at 5 a.m. the next day. So that is a wild and crazy work schedule that even some of us, I mean, I think if I'm honest with myself, I spent a lot of time working on this kind of stuff right here, but I would not want to spend 16 hours, even now, in the prime of my life, working in a factory like that under those conditions. I think sitting at a desk and not having a break is unbearable. So there's also going to be class tensions that are going to emerge. And when I talk about this is I'm talking about social stratification, all right? Class stratification, class struggles. Like what I mean with this is like a high class, middle class, and a low class. All right, so that's what we mean by social stratification, and that's what I'm talking about by these growing class tensions that are emerging. Basically, some of the middle class are even richer than the aristocrats, and that's kind of a trend we have started to see as early as the Enlightenment period. But they're also looked down upon, so they never got the same amount of societal, esteem as the aristocrats would have gotten. And then you've also got your working class, which is there's very little social changes for them. Someone who is super poor would probably continue to be poor in the grand scheme of things, even though they might have better wages and better, availability of certain food items or certain manufacturers. They still are going to be very, very poor and live in the worst conditions, and their struggle doesn't really get that much better over time. The rich are the ones who seem to be benefiting the most from this early industrialization. So, if we look at some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, you got immediate and long-term effects. First, I want to look at the immediate positive effects, and that is, it's going to create jobs. It's going to promote invention and progress. So people are going to find new inventions that they're going to be able to make, like the steam engine and the seed drill and all these other things we've already talked about. It's going to increase production and also increase the standard of living, even for the working class, but they're still going to be very poor compared to the others. It's going to also improve housing. More food and cheaper food is going to mean that more people will live. So more, in particular, kids live. When more kids live, it leads to higher population. All right. So now we might not think of higher population in this context as a positive effect, but I think more kids living is a positive effect and needs to be mentioned. Also, there's going to ultimately be some medical innovations. Not as many initially as there would be, but by definitely the 1800s, you're starting to see a huge degree of science involving medicine that's going to be a direct, effect of the Industrial Revolution. Some of the long-term effects that we're going to experience is that most people on Earth are going to have access to lots of manufactured goods, and that's really cool. So when we say most people on Earth, we mean this is today. All right. So yeah, now some people might have more access to this stuff than others. In the United States, we have seemingly limitless access to manufactured goods, and places in Sub-Saharan Africa, places in Kenya or Democratic Republic of the Congo or South Sudan, they probably aren't going to have as much access, but they do have access, and probably more than you think, to a lot of manufactured goods. We're also going to continue to improve over time on the way we create these manufactured goods to make them even cheaper. We're going to have innovations in transportation, things like shipping containers and stuff like this. That's going to decrease shipping costs and decrease overall production prices, which is going to lead to more manufactured goods and better standard of living for people. Also, things like these communications and things like the shipping costs and all that is going to lead to a heightened sense of globalization. We're going to end the course with this, so stay tuned for that. But globalization refers to our interconnectedness. That's a big word there. With every other country in the world. We're in it for environmental issues. We're in it for political issues. The main thing this has to do with, though, is economic connectedness. I say economic issues, but economic connectedness. We'll talk more about globalization, like I said, at the very, very tail end of the course. But overall, Industrial Revolution has benefited richer countries the most. Now, everyone has benefited to some extent from globalization and from the Industrial Revolution, but if you remember from looking at the age of exploration, many of these countries that are, for example, the triangular trade system, the British, the Europeans, they were the ones who were manufacturing the raw materials that they needed from colonies. You're going to see where these countries continue to dominate that production and that trade as they, later on during the age of imperialism, exploit poorer countries for their resources. And even today, you can kind of say that, I guess you hear the argument that this kind of thing still goes on to some extent. Maybe not outright imperialism, but what we might call economic imperialism. Okay, and so this here is a chart that's in your book that summarizes some of the short-term and long-term effects of industrialization. So if you look here, for example, under working conditions, you're going to see industry creates new jobs. Great. Factories are unsafe and dangerous and child labor and all that kind of stuff. Factory bosses exercise harsh discipline, but then later on you're going to see long-term effect. Workers want higher wages, shorter hours, and better conditions. Now, today, in developing countries like the United States, we see where many of this labor, many of these factory kind of jobs are being outsourced to countries with cheaper labor. So you might see now that some of the jobs that people might have depended on ever since the Industrial Revolution tend to disappear as more countries start to emerge on this industrial scene and want to get in on that. They offer, though I guess, are willing to do the work for way cheaper than countries like the United States are willing to do it. Factory workers are often overworked and underpaid. Overseers beat the children. Upper class resented the middle class, even though that they were just as wealthy. But you're going to see an overall standard of living generally rise. So I'm not going to read over this, but I definitely think you guys should take the time to look at this and weigh it for what it's worth. So the Industrial Revolution isn't going to just stay confined into Great Britain and also into Europe. It's going to actually spread. It's going to diffuse. This word diffuse means to spread. It's going to diffuse to other continents as well. And it's going to start at the northeastern United States. Even today, this is our manufacturing center. You're also going to see it move into Belgium, Germany, France, Catalonia, which is a province in Spain. And you can actually look up European core and do an image search. I should have probably included one here. And you can actually draw a circle around the regions which still make up the manufacturing core in Europe today. So that when we talk about the European core, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's going to include Great Britain. It's going to include these countries here as well. And that's where most of the manufacturing is done. And then many of these regions are still industrial centers today, as we just mentioned. So in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more and highlight some of the industrial philosophies that are going to emerge as a direct result of these new industrialization changes that have occurred. And we're going to talk about how they've impacted Europe at that time, as well as kind of start looking at how they impact us even today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.